So, imagine waking up in the opulent, highly secured quarters of Clarence House, pouring a cup of morning tea, opening the freshly printed Daily Press Dispatch, the exact same document that gets emailed to thousands of journalists across the globe, and discovering that your entire life's work has just been effectively deleted. That is exactly the humiliating, breathtaking reality that Queen Camilla reportedly faced. She didn't find out about her massive, institutional demotion behind closed doors in a tearful family meeting. She found out by reading a sterilized, corporate press release that completely stripped her of her primary duties. And honestly, the sheer staggering disrespect of that specific detail is the entire story. Forget the lost military patronages for a second. Forget the reshuffled charity titles. The absolute most revealing, terrifying part of this entire palace restructure is the method of delivery. You do not simply forget to pick up the telephone and inform the reigning queen consort that her calendar is being permanently wiped clean. That is never an administrative oversight. That is a highly calculated, ruthlessly executed message. Before we dive into the deeply uncomfortable, explosive details of this internal palace coup, do me a massive favor and hit subscribe to the channel. We decode the PR spin and tell you exactly what is actually happening behind those palace gates. It takes 2 seconds, and it genuinely helps us keep bringing you the truth. All right, let's get into the mechanics of this betrayal. According to highly placed palace insiders, Camilla's initial reaction wasn't just anger. It was a profound, world-shattering shock. She reportedly looked at her closest aides and expressed a sentiment that perfectly encapsulates her current psychological state. She has spent half a century surviving the absolute worst this institution could throw at her, outlasting every single one of her enemies, only to be taken out by a piece of office paperwork. To truly grasp the sheer gravity of this insult, you have strictly got to look at exactly what Camilla Parker Bowles had to endure to get that crown placed on her head. She was never supposed to be queen. She had absolutely no aristocratic pedigree that rivaled the core Windsor bloodline. She wasn't molded from birth to wave at crowds, and she possessed exactly zero formal media training. For the vast majority of her adult life, she was the one, single woman that the British establishment desperately prayed would just vanish into thin air. When she met Charles in the 1970s, long before the tragic fairy tale of Princess Diana was ever constructed, they formed an unbreakable, foundational bond. But the men in gray suits who ran the palace decided she was entirely unsuitable. She was considered too experienced, too fiercely independent, and far too uncontrollable to be a pliable Princess of Wales. So, they forcefully steered Charles toward a much younger, much more naive aristocratic bride. What spectacularly imploded next was arguably the most famous, destructive love triangle in modern human history. For decades, Camilla was universally cast as the ultimate villain. She was the homewrecker. She was the wicked older woman who ruthlessly destroyed the people's princess. She was hunted by packs of rabid paparazzi. Her private telephone calls were illegally intercepted and broadcast to the world, and she was subjected to a level of sustained, vicious public humiliation that would have utterly broken 99% of the human population. But Camilla did not break. She did not crumble. She possessed a terrifying level of patience. As Charles and Diana's marriage spectacularly burned to the ground, and the reality of Charles's unwavering devotion to Camilla became undeniable, she did something incredibly strategic. She did absolutely nothing. She never sat down with a primetime journalist to cry about her side of the story. She never hired a flashy Hollywood PR firm to aggressively rehab her image. She never wrote a tell-all book. She just stayed completely silent, stayed relentlessly loyal to Charles, and allowed the slow, inevitable passage of time to do the heavy lifting. And against all astronomical odds, her strategy worked. The British public slowly, grudgingly, exhausted their anger. Through years of quiet, unglamorous charity work, a complete refusal to complain, and an undeniable, stabilizing influence on the future king, Camilla rebuilt her legacy brick by brick. By the time Charles finally ascended the throne in 2022, she had achieved the impossible. She had secured the queen consort title with the explicit, written blessing of Queen Elizabeth II herself, a woman who had finally realized that Camilla had genuinely earned her stripes. So, to go from that, from 50 years of surviving the trenches, playing the longest, most painful game of chess in royal history, and finally securing your prize, to discovering through a morning email that your life's work is being actively dismantled by your own stepson, that is not a realignment of duties. That is an eviction notice wrapped in Buckingham Palace letterhead. The official, publicly released document detailing the restructure utilized all the classic sterile buzzwords of modern corporate PR. It spoke glowingly of institutional streamlining, future-proofing the monarchy, maximizing charitable efficiency, and modernization. But seasoned royal correspondents and palace insiders immediately zeroed in on the glaring, massive void at the center of the document. Camilla's name was practically eradicated. She was conspicuously missing from the rosters of upcoming, high-stakes diplomatic state visits. Several of her most beloved, deeply personal charitable patronages had been quietly reassigned. Some were handed to Kate, while others were dispersed to minor, younger royals. Massive, traditional events that Camilla had proudly presided over for the last 15 years were either abruptly cancelled or entirely rebranded to exclude her office. When the reality of the press release set in, the atmosphere inside Clarence House reportedly turned instantly toxic. Staff members leaked that the Queen Consort's reaction was absolutely volcanic. She allegedly threw the document onto a desk and demanded to know if this was the ultimate reward for a lifetime of silence and loyalty. The absolute fury wasn't just directed at the loss of power. It was directed at the architect of the humiliation, Prince William. And this is exactly where the timeline of this betrayal becomes deeply uncomfortably fascinating. Because a massive structural overhaul of this magnitude does not happen overnight. This wasn't a sudden, impulsive decision made over a weekend. The restructure blueprints had been circulating internally through the highest, most classified levels of the palace bureaucracy for months. It had been pitched by William's team as a comprehensive, necessary strategy for ensuring the monarchy's survival in the 21st century. King Charles had absolutely seen drafts of this document. He had legally signed off on major portions of the restructure. But according to frantic defensive leaks from his own aides, the king supposedly didn't fully comprehend the brutal, real-world implications these changes would have on his wife's daily life. Whether that excuse is genuine, or just incredibly convenient, cowardly royal misdirection, the end result was exactly the same. Camilla was entirely blindsided, and she wanted answers. Before lunchtime on the day the press release dropped, she reportedly demanded a strictly private, immediate audience with King Charles. She did not ask for William, not yet. She went straight to the man she had sacrificed her entire reputation for, and what transpired inside that private study was reportedly explosive. She allegedly held the printed press release in her hand, treating it like undeniable evidence in a courtroom, and demanded to know exactly how much Charles knew before it was sent out to the global media. According to whispers from the staff outside the doors, Charles hesitated. And in the brutal world of royal politics, a hesitation is a confession. That brief silence told Camilla absolutely everything she needed to know. She reportedly viewed it as the ultimate betrayal. She had stood beside him when crowds literally spat at her car. She had absorbed the world's hatred so he wouldn't have to face it alone. And now, at the absolute zenith of their reign, he had allowed his son's office to casually drop her from the narrative. Charles allegedly attempted to pacify her, stammering through explanations about William taking on more necessary executive leadership, as the king's health required him to step back. He tried to frame the restructure as a purely strategic, demographic necessity, rather than a personal attack. Camilla was absolutely having none of it. She is far too politically astute. She saw Prince William's distinct, ruthless fingerprints all over every single page of that document. So, a second, infinitely more dangerous meeting was convened. This time, the doors were locked, and there were only 3 people allowed in the room: King Charles, Queen Camilla, and Prince William, the Prince of Wales. From what highly placed insiders have managed to piece together, Camilla did not walk into that room to beg, plead, or negotiate a compromise. She walked in with absolute, freezing intent. She was there to confront the heir to the throne. She reportedly looked William directly in the eye and informed him that he was actively, maliciously depriving her of responsibilities that she had bled for. She made it explicitly clear that unlike some members of the family, she had not simply inherited her respect, nor had she just married into it. She had brutally, painfully earned every single inch of her standing. William reportedly did not flinch. He did not raise his voice, and he did not apologize. He allegedly spoke to his stepmother with a soft, chillingly firm pragmatism. He informed her that this was entirely about the survival of the future. He stated that the British public, the taxpayers who fund their entire existence, demand a monarchy that visually and functionally represents the future generation. He was simply preparing the institution for that unavoidable reality. He insisted it wasn't about penalizing her past, it was simply about creating absolute clarity for the brand. But you have to completely unpack that specific word, clarity. When Prince William and his hyper-modern team of advisors talk about clarity, they are talking about something incredibly specific and completely ruthless. They are actively architecting a monarchy that is unbelievably lean, visually flawless, undeniably young, and absolutely 100% free of historical scandal. They are building a corporate entity where every single highly visible face perfectly represents the idealized brand, and Camilla, carrying the heavy, tangled ghosts of the 1990s, the messy step-family dynamics, and decades of deeply ingrained tabloid baggage, simply does not fit into the pristine picture William is painting. One senior royal source broke it down with brutal honesty to a Sunday paper. Prince William views the ancient British monarchy strictly as a modern corporate business. Each working royal is an asset representing the brand. He desperately wants the brand to be clean, unproblematic, and visually compelling to a younger demographic. Camilla, through absolutely no new fault of her own, simply does not test well in that specific demographic. Therefore, she is being phased out. It is not necessarily born out of personal disrespect or familial hatred. It is born out of a terrifying, icy desire for total control. William's overarching vision for the House of Windsor is ruthlessly pragmatic. He fundamentally understands the devastating power of modern digital media. He knows that communicating effectively with the younger generations is the only thing that will keep the anti-monarchy movements at bay. He completely understands that the crown's future is determined entirely by utility and survival, not by sentimental loyalties to the past. So, when Camilla allegedly snapped back at him, reminding him that he is not actually the king yet, and warning him that if he expected her to simply vanish quietly into the countryside, he had severely misjudged her, she was naming the exact, agonizing dynamic in the room. She was right. William is not the king. Charles is the sovereign. Charles possesses the ultimate, final veto power over every single schedule, title, and restructure in that palace. But according to multiple, corroborating accounts of that showdown, King Charles sat in his chair looking pale, exhausted, and deeply, emotionally paralyzed. Some aides who witnessed the immediate aftermath muttered in the corridors that the king appeared to have completely, fundamentally lost control of his own court. The meeting reportedly ended without a single resolution. There were absolutely no apologies offered. There was no promise to reverse the humiliating press release. Camilla allegedly stormed out of the room first. William departed second, looking entirely unaffected by the emotional explosion. And according to one specific, haunting detail from a palace staff member, King Charles remained sitting completely alone in that silent room for nearly an hour. It was the specific day the throne officially cracked, the insider explained. It didn't happen on a balcony in front of millions of people. It happened behind closed oak doors, but the structural shift in power was absolute and undeniable. What makes this entire restructure so particularly brutal and so incredibly difficult for Camilla to swallow is exactly how Kate Middleton has been weaponized and positioned throughout this entire transition. While Camilla was actively raging behind closed doors, fighting for her institutional life, Catherine, the Princess of Wales, was rising. And she was rising gracefully, silently, and with terrifying, deliberate precision. To the untrained eye of the general public, Kate is simply the loyal, beautiful, endlessly stylish wife of the future king, going about her royal duties with a perfect smile. But high-level insiders at the palace realize exactly what is happening on a strategic level. Kate isn't merely ascending organically. She is being actively, aggressively positioned to eclipse the queen consort, and Camilla has been forced to sit and watch it happen in real time. For many years, Camilla had managed to keep Kate at a polite, professional arm's length. She had watched Kate rise from a nervous commoner to a polished duchess, and finally to a globally adored princess. Kate was always perfectly composed, always wildly popular, but she had never actively challenged Camilla's ultimate position as the senior woman in the family. But the exact second Charles gained the throne, the entire chessboard flipped. With King Charles increasingly distracted by the exhausting demands of his new post, his ongoing health treatments, and William plunging aggressively deeper into absolute leadership, a massive, undeniable void in daily visibility opened up. Kate filled that void effortlessly. First, there was a highly calculated shift in public engagement strategy. Kate started appearing significantly more frequently on the daily circular, She was taking on massive, solo engagements with vastly greater prominence and media backing than ever before. Vital, high-profile charities and arts organizations that were once historically associated with Camilla's name were abruptly, quietly reallocated to the Princess of Wales, always justified under the convenient guise of modernizing the causes for a new generation. Kate's public remarks became noticeably more authoritative. Her wardrobe selections transitioned from accessible fashion to striking, commanding regal power dressing. Her entire presence became infinitely more purposeful. One senior courtier admitted anonymously that the new energy surrounding Kate is absolutely not an accident. Every single photograph, every released comment, and every orchestrated event is part of a master plan. She is being aggressively promoted by William's office to be the true face of the monarchy, and the global press noticed immediately. The daily headlines subtly, then aggressively shifted. It was no longer Queen Camilla attends. It became Princess Kate leads. The visual hierarchy wasn't subtle anymore. The narrative was actively changing, and Camilla was losing not just her daily duties, but her entire, hard-fought place in the historical spotlight. The most agonizing part for Camilla wasn't even the fact that Kate was succeeding. She knows Kate is good at the job. The agonizing part was that Prince William appeared to be the one gleefully facilitating the erasure. William made absolutely sure that Kate was placed center stage at major state gatherings, perfectly positioned for the front-page photographs. He assigned her the highest visibility responsibilities. Every single public move the Prince and Princess of Wales made, from subtle hand-holding to perfectly coordinated family appearances with their children, portrayed an impenetrable wall of unity, youth, and unproblematic strength. They perfectly represented the monarchy's bright, shiny future, and Camilla fiercely believed that they were using that exact bright light to cast her permanently into the shadows of the past. Even worse were the relentless, stinging murmurs among the palace staff, the aides, and the royal press pack. The overwhelming consensus was that William regarded Kate, not Camilla, as the actual, de facto queen-in-waiting. Not an official legal title yet, but in every single metric of symbolism, raw power, and global influence. The implication was brutal and clear. Whenever King Charles ultimately steps down or passes away, the public will already seamlessly envision Kate in the supreme role. Camilla will be instantly reduced to a historical footnote, a lingering vestige from a deeply unpopular former era that William wants desperately to forget. The most terrifying part of William's master plan is that it was essentially foolproof, because every single time a negative story about Camilla's diminishing presence, or her anger over the restructure, started gaining traction on social media or in the papers, a massively distracting, highly positive headline would miraculously appear. Kate visiting a children's hospital in a stunning outfit. Prince George attending a brand new royal engagement. A flawlessly produced, cinematic family video released directly to Instagram. The press, always eager for beautiful, high-engagement content, fully cooperated with the distraction. The general public remained largely oblivious to the blood on the palace floor. But not everyone was buying the glossy spin. Social media algorithms started buzzing. Dedicated royal observers began heavily scrutinizing the official palace websites, noting that Camilla's presence had been drastically minimized in important historical sections. Online sleuths began investigating the quiet cancellation of her events. Massive Twitter threads debated the sudden, glaring change in her daily visibility. TikTok videos went viral, showing a stark comparison of Camilla standing front and center last year, compared to her being practically invisible today. Naturally, the official palace communications outlets said absolutely nothing. It was a silent, digital narrative war, and Prince William was winning it flawlessly, until a final, explosive leak temporarily shifted the momentum. An unidentified, highly placed palace aide, likely loyal to Camilla's camp, spoke directly to a major Sunday newspaper. They leaked the specific detail that Camilla had confronted Charles in tears, demanding to know why she was being systematically excluded from the inner circle of decision-making. That specific story exploded across the internet, not just because it was sensational, tabloid gossip, but because it finally confirmed what many astute observers already suspected. The Queen Consort hadn't graciously decided to take a step back. She had been forcefully, aggressively pushed. And with that single leak, the carefully managed PR blackout finally cracked. Mainstream commentators started asking actual, highly uncomfortable questions on morning television. Why didn't Camilla attend the recent state banquet? Why had Kate so thoroughly dominated the visual coverage of the last 3 royal tours? Why had the Palace Communications Office completely refused to clarify any of these glaring absences? The British royal family, an institution that spends millions of pounds a year to project an image of stoic, unbroken unity, was once again facing massive global rumors of a vicious internal civil war. Only this time, the ghost of Princess Diana wasn't at the direct center of the battlefield. It was Camilla. So, where exactly does this brutal restructure leave her now? Officially, legally, she remains the queen consort. The title is still attached to her name, and she still wears the crown at state openings. But functionally, operationally, she has been reduced to a ceremonial shadow. She is being forced to sit and watch as the ancient institution she sacrificed her entire life to sustain is completely remade in real time, totally without her input. There were no grand press releases announcing her formal demotion. There were no royal decrees explicitly stripping her of her honors, but the institutional signs are absolute and unmistakable. Her sudden, glaring absence from high-profile strategic events. Her name vanishing from internal official briefings. Kate gradually, seamlessly absorbing her entire public role. And the absolute worst part for Camilla is that this isn't a massive controversy driven by public outrage or scandal. It is a slow, methodical, deliberate corporate transformation planned entirely from within the family. It is being led by William, fully sanctioned by Charles's paralyzed silence, and heavily disguised by brilliant press diversion tactics. Camilla feels deeply, fundamentally betrayed, not because she is some power-hungry villain who desperately craved ultimate authority, but because she genuinely, truly believed she had finally earned her safe place at the table. She stood firmly with Charles through the darkest, most humiliating days of his life. She faced global mockery, intense social alienation, and spent decades hiding in the shadows just to protect him. She fiercely believed that by finally reaching the pinnacle of the crown, her position in royal history would be unassailable and secure. But history, heavily guided by Prince William, appears to have completely different plans for her legacy. She is now faced with a genuinely impossible, agonizing choice. Does she accept the demotion, remain dignified, dutiful, and increasingly invisible? Does she just play the part of the quiet, supportive wife until the end of Charles's reign? That is undeniably the path of least resistance. It preserves her remaining dignity. It avoids a catastrophic public conflict. It allows King Charles to maintain whatever fragile peace remains in his final years. But it also means accepting total, humiliating defeat. It means quietly watching her own legacy be actively erased while she is still alive to witness it. It means deeply knowing that everything she built, everything she suffered for, will ultimately be remembered merely as a problematic footnote in William's streamlined history book. For a woman with Camilla's immense pride and undeniable resilience, that is a profoundly bitter pill to swallow. Alternatively, she can choose to fight. She can push back. She can demand a vastly more visible role. She can use her intimate access to Charles to ruthlessly advocate for herself, making it explicitly clear that she will not be sidelined by a spreadsheet without a war. But that aggressive path is fraught with absolute danger. It pits her directly, publicly against Prince William, the wildly popular future king who controls the media narrative. It creates devastating headlines that the palace PR machine cannot control. It puts an unbearable strain on her relationship with Charles, who is already caught in an impossible, agonizing position between his wife and his heir. And most dangerously, it risks turning the volatile court of public opinion violently against her once again, because when forced to choose, the public almost always sides with youth, beauty, and the future, not with the embattled, historically controversial consort of an aging king. So, according to she is far too politically aware, far too battle-scarred, not to see the exact dimensions of the trap she is currently in. Every single move she makes from this day forward will be intensely scrutinized, heavily criticized, and potentially weaponized against her by William's camp. Total silence is a surrender of her legacy. Open resistance is institutional self-destruction. She is entirely trapped between two completely impossible outcomes, and the person who masterminded that trap is her own stepson. There is, of course, a third possibility, one that absolutely nobody in the palace wants to actively contemplate, but one that hangs heavily in the air. Camilla could simply, quietly withdraw. Not officially, not with a dramatic public statement or a televised interview, but practically. She could choose to spend the vast majority of her time at Ray Mill House, her private, deeply personal country residence, away from the Windsor bubble. She could voluntarily reduce her public engagements to almost zero, not because William ordered her to, but because she is simply, bone-deep tired of fighting a war she can no longer win. she could actively choose personal peace over historical relevance. For a woman who has spent her entire adult life locked in the exhausting crosshairs of global public judgment, the profound appeal of a quiet, undisturbed life must be absolutely immense. No more vicious press briefings. No more tense, hostile strategy meetings with stepchildren. No more agonizingly watching her name disappear from the daily schedules. Just privacy, her own children and grandchildren, and the simple, ordinary pleasures she enjoyed long before the heavy machinery of the crown consumed her entire existence. But that, too, would be a profound kind of defeat. And Camilla Rosemary Shand did not survive 50 brutal years of royal warfare, outlast Princess Diana, and conquer the British establishment just to walk away quietly in the end. Whatever path she ultimately decides to take, one overarching reality is already incredibly, undeniably clear. The era of Queen Camilla, acting as a central, driving, influential figure in the British monarchy, is completely over. The restructure has already happened. The patronages have already been permanently reassigned. The media spotlight has definitively moved on. The future of the institution entirely belongs to William and Kate, and they are absolutely not waiting for anyone's permission to claim it. Camilla's story is obviously not completely finished. She is still physically here. She is still legally the queen consort. She still possesses immense access, deep relationships, and decades of dangerous, highly classified institutional knowledge. But the central narrative has permanently shifted. She is no longer the protagonist of the story. She has been forcefully downgraded to a supporting, background character in someone else's reign. And for a fiercely intelligent woman who fought so incredibly hard to be seen, to be respected, and to be acknowledged by the world, that might just be the absolute hardest thing of all to accept. It is not just the loss of executive power. It is the total, chilling loss of relevance. It is the devastating realization that after absolutely everything she endured, after all the agonizing waiting, the stoic silence, and the brilliant, careful strategy, the royal story simply moved on without her. And the people holding the pen to write the next chapter didn't even think she deserved a phone call to tell her it was over.